Picture a machine so massive it was designed to single-handedly replace global maritime shipping, a rolling leviathan tearing through the European landscape, dwarfing anything that had ever been built for the rails. To understand how extreme this concept was, we have to look at this standard track gauge. For over a century, the distance between the rails on a standard track has been exactly 1,435 millimeters. It is the baseline geometry for railways virtually everywhere on Earth. That specific width wasn't an accident. It was a universally proven standard that was already perfectly capable of moving massive amounts of heavy freight and millions of troops across the globe. But by 1941, the global reality had violently shifted. Germany was entrenched in a brutal two-front war. Industrial materials, particularly steel, were incredibly scarce. Every single ounce of metal produced in factories like this was strictly rationed for immediate military survival. Under those conditions, any proposed infrastructure project would need to solve an immediate existential logistical crisis to justify diverting even a single ton of steel away from the front lines. Yet, in the middle of this massive resource drought, Adolf Hitler demanded an entirely new supertrain network. He prioritized this pet project over the war effort, granting it an astonishing 84,000 tons of the Reich's most precious steel. This map shows the intended scale of the network. He envisioned trains traveling at 200 kilometers per hour along continuous lines stretching from Gibraltar in the west all the way to Vladivostok in the east, with branches reaching down into India and the Sea of Japan. Despite fighting for its life, German industry was forced to comply. Top engineering firms submitted over 100 mechanical drafts for the locomotive's chassis and internal boiler components, which presents a massive engineering mystery. Why would a regime locked in a war of attrition attempt to scrap a perfectly functional logistical network to build an impossible megastructure? This scale comparison illustrates the problem. Hitler demanded a track gauge of 3 meters, double the universal standard. Passenger cars were 6 meters wide and 7 meters tall. These double-decker structures made a modern train look tiny. Freight variants stretched over a kilometer, dragging unimaginable weights. But this geometry creates an immediate catastrophic infrastructure failure. The moment you double the width of a train, every single existing railway tunnel, station platform, and bridge in Europe instantly becomes completely obsolete. Accommodating these colossal trains meant they couldn't just lay down new track. They would have to blast wider tunnels, demolish city stations, and rebuild the continent's entire transport architecture from absolute scratch. The Breitspurbahn, or broad gauge railway, was never meant to be a practical transportation upgrade. It was an ideological demand to reshape the physical geometry of the continent to fit a dictator's machine. Looking past the massive exterior chassis, the internal payload reveals the train's true purpose. It was designed as a mobile colonization vessel. The blueprints called for absurd luxury in the first-class upper decks. Passengers would enjoy massive viewing platforms, dining cars paneled in natural wood, high ceilings meant for chandeliers, and bath cars featuring multiple tubs. That opulence sat in sharp contrast with the mechanical layout at the back of the train. Specific cars were engineered as Eastern worker carriages, designed to hold 480 enslaved people, meant for forced labor in German factories and fields. These carriages were engineered with horrific spatial efficiency. They were seatless, windowless compartments with wooden benches. 8 captives per room would sit on them during the day and sleep on them at night. Their meals were cooked in a massive adjoining kitchen and pushed through the train in communal buckets. The internal engineering of these cars perfectly mirrored the strict Nazi social hierarchy, creating a rolling physical blueprint of their post-war master plan. Because of its role in mass colonization, this megastructure was built as a weapon. Hidden under domes were massive anti-aircraft installations, and the lower decks housed vast internal ammunition chambers. Its extreme heavy lift capacity meant the train could effortlessly transport entire battalions of soldiers, rows of heavy tanks, or even whole ships over land. The inclusion of all this heavy weaponry points to a grim calculation. The planners fully anticipated endless, violent local resistance across their newly conquered territories. The defensive engineering proves the Nazis designed their infrastructure not for a stable post-war peace, but to sustain a perpetual state of conquest. The deepest flaw in the project wasn't mechanical, it was logical. German railway experts knew perfectly well that standard gauge trains could have easily accomplished all the same logistical goals without requiring a total rebuild of Europe. So why did top engineering firms dedicate vital resources to drafting over 100 iterations of these blueprints? Because sheer terror of contradicting the dictator forced them to abandon scientific reality for their own survival. Totalitarianism inherently corrupts the engineering process. When objective facts become dangerous to acknowledge, structural logic is discarded in favor of stroking a dictator's ego. The leading Nazi architect Albert Speer later noted a fatal flaw in Hitler's thinking. He blindly equated massive physical scale with ultimate success. The bigger the project, the more enthusiastic he became, regardless of its actual utility. The Breitspurbahn was never built, but its blueprints survive as historical proof that when ideology hijacks the laws of engineering, it produces monsters instead of machines.